Big news. The DNC has filed a new lawsuit to fight against election certification delays in the state of Georgia. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. This month, the Georgia State Election Board passed new rules that risk the timely certification of the presidential election this November. Marc, what is the Georgia State Board of Elections and what rules did they pass?
All right, the state election board in Georgia is supposed to be a body that passes relatively simple, non-controversial rules about how elections are held. It doesn't oversee the conduct of elections. That's done under the Secretary of State's office and the counties. But they are supposed to pass these sort of routine rules that let the process work. But boy, have they turned into something more than that. This is a MAGA-dominated board that Donald Trump called out 3 of the 5 members of at a political rally, calling them pit bulls and that working for his victory. And they have been, hard at work passing rule after rule after rule, trying to unlevel the playing field in the post-election to give discretion to MAGA election deniers who don't want to certify accurate election results if Donald Trump and his ilk lose. And so kudos to the Democratic National Committee and its lawyers for filing this lawsuit.
These new rules say that a county board can only certify an election after reasonable inquiry, that tabulation and canvassing of the election are complete and accurate, and that the results are a true and accurate accounting of all votes cast in that election. The second rule they passed says that individual county board members are allowed to examine all election-related documentation created during the conduct of elections prior to the certification of results. Marc,
Right.
These rules sound kind of routine and mundane, but they actually pose a really big risk to the entire elections process, right?
They do, because the people doing the certification of elections are supposed to take the numbers and put them in a form. I mean, their job is like the scoreboard operator, right? And we don't tell the scoreboard operator you are to engage in reasonable inquiry, right? Like your job is, if the umpire says a run was scored, you put a run on the scoreboard, right? You're not there to look at all the evidence yourself and say, I think the umpire got that one wrong. But that's what they are trying to do in Georgia. They are trying to say that the people whose job it is to take the precinct results, to take the provisional ballots and figure out, which provisional ballots have to count, and then just do basic arithmetic. They're trying to say those people are basically investigators who are supposed to exercise their own judgment, when that is the opposite of what this role is. But Republicans want this because they think by giving them this discretion that it will allow these otherwise ministerial acts, the job of, taking numbers and adding them up, it'll turn it into something that they can abuse by not counting ballots, by discounting precincts, or just by delaying, by just saying, we're not ready yet. My reasonable inquiry is not done yet. And we know that either inaccurate numbers or the delay in numbers can have profound impacts on the ability to certify accurate election results.
So these county boards are just supposed to sign off on the final tabulation of votes, report them to the state. Marc, I think people would say, if there are concerns about the election results, if they do have questions about how things were run or how things were conducted, and it's not the county board's job to investigate those issues, whose job is it?
Yeah, so look, there are a number of avenues available to investigate those things. The first is that a losing candidate can demand a recount. A losing candidate can launch what's called an election contest, which is a lawsuit in which you say, hey, I think the certified results are wrong for these reasons, right? There is an adjudicatory process, and in the case of a recount process to figure out if there were errors. But the thing is, you can't recount results until you have certified results, right? Because you're recounting the certified results. You can't have an election contest, that litigation that I described, until you have actual results. Why? Because what are you litigating over? So the fact is, there are mechanisms for this that exist in the law that take place after certification. And of course, you can also have other investigative bodies do investigations. You have attorneys general, you have local prosecutors who can look, although those don't affect the election results per se. But it is not the job of the people who are put in place to conduct arithmetic to do more than that.
And we've talked about this before. The concern with delaying election certification at the local level is that it has a domino effect, right? Like it takes one county in Georgia to refuse to certify results. That holds up the entire state election certification. And if we're talking about races for president, Senate, Congress, that affects everyone nationwide because you now don't have complete and accurate election results for federal office.
That's right. And so in order for a state to certify their election results, all the jurisdictions in the state have to certify their election results. I mean, Paige, we faced this in 2022 in Cochise County, Arizona, where, the Republican board there was refusing to certify the accurate election results. And at some level, one of the questions you and I got a lot of from our audience was, well, why does it matter? Like, how many voters were there in Cochise County? And the answer is, the problem is the state of Arizona can't say we're going to certify the statewide Senate results or the AG results or the governor's results, and we're just excluding a county. Like, you can't do that. So any one county or jurisdiction can hold up a state. And that's a really big deal. That's a big deal when you're talking about, governors and AGs and secretaries of state, but also obviously for president and senator, and even in many instances for Congress. And look, the fact is, as I mentioned, you have election contests, you have recounts, you also have courts, right? Courts can say to a county board of elections, don't certify your results, because we, the court, have a concern. But it's not the job of the individual election officials just to exercise their own discretion without a judge or the parties being involved.
Georgia's state election board has passed these rules. How are other officials in Georgia responding?
Well, like many things in Georgia, it's kind of a mixed bag. So look, the good news is the Georgia Association of Voter Registration and Election Officials, which is the bipartisan association of all the election officials, they have come out against this. They have asked the board to stop creating new rules, because every time they create a new rule, it means more work for the frontline election officials who have to implement those rules. The Secretary of State, Brad Rassenberger, did kind of what I would say is the minimum necessary, which is he criticized these rules. But I'll tell you what he didn't do. He didn't sue over them, right? He hasn't actually done anything other than public criticism. It has been left to the Democratic National Committee and their lawyers to bring litigation. And again, kudos to them for doing that. Paige, we have reached 150,000 subscribers on this YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone, for watching, for learning with us, for giving us your feedback and your questions. And as a special gift to you, we are giving you a special code for 10% off on all Democracy Docket merchandise. Go to democracydocket.com and click on the store link or in the link in the show notes below and enter the special code DDYT10 to get 10% off your next purchase.
So let's talk about this lawsuit. What are Democrats specifically asking for in relation to these rules?
The lawsuit asks for two really simple things, which should be non-controversial. The first is for the court to affirm that the job of these election officials is ministerial. It is mandatory. It is not discretionary. It is not optional, right? That their job is to certify. The second thing is that they have to meet the deadlines. That they have to conduct the certification in time for the November 12th deadline that is in state law. So whatever else they do, it has to be done in that time, but that they are not allowed to interpose their own opinions on what the results were. They have to certify them as they actually are.
And this lawsuit from the Democratic National Committee and the Georgia Democratic Party isn't the only lawsuit in the state involving election certification.
No. So in some ways, this whole cascade of bad things, how's that for a good legal term, everyone, in the state of Georgia, started with a lawsuit in Fulton County, Georgia, where a Republican board member there filed a lawsuit to say that she, in fact, does have the discretion not to certify the election results. In that case, it related to a May primary election, and that case has been sort of moving, but very, very slowly. She is not surprisingly represented by the right-wing America First Policy Institute. This is an organization that is part of the large constellation of right-wing organizations that you and I talk about. I've written about it on Democracy Docket. Please, if you have not already, make sure you are subscribed to Democracy Docket. It is free, and a link is in the show notes below. But that lawsuit, I think, when you look back in the timetable, was kind of like the opening shot, the opening salvo in this war against accurate election certification. And it led then to the state board passing these rules, and now to the DNC lawsuit and the state party lawsuit trying to fight against them.
Georgia now has these two competing lawsuits. You have the first one from Republicans who want to say that election certification is discretionary. Local election officials are not required to certify results. And the second one from Democrats saying, no, election certification is mandatory. You can't choose to not certify the results. So we're about 2 months out from the election, right? Do you think that these cases will move quickly, and would the Georgia Supreme Court eventually get involved?
Yeah, so look, I think they will move quickly enough. I mean, the good news is for everyone, there is time to resolve this, right? The election is not until November 5th, which means the first act of certification can't take place until, frankly, November 6th. So there is plenty of time between now and then for the courts, including the trial courts and any appellate courts, to review these issues. They should not be complicated. They are not particularly fact intensive. The rules are what they are. The law is what it is. So I fully expect that the courts will resolve this in time before we get to November 6th, and that we will have a decision. I also, Paige, would not count out the real possibility that there will be additional litigation, because there is no reason to believe that the state board will follow the request made of them to stop passing new election rules. So we may not have seen the last of the bad rules that come out of this board. And so it is very, very possible that you will see more litigation on one side or the other, or all of the above, about this issue. Make sure to stay up to date on the latest litigation in Georgia and around the country. You are subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. The link is in the show notes below. Thank you all for watching this edition of Democracy Docket. We'll see you next time.